Okay.
All right, so basically what I was kind of, thinking this could be is just I kind of prepared a little, a little presentation here based on, I spent a semester in LA for one of my last semesters of college just to get some credit there. And it was one of the first days that one of my professors gave a presentation that I was just like, this is the best classroom presentation I've ever seen. But basically, I don't know if you guys know this, there's a screenwriting book called Save the Cat, and it really, it lays out this structure for storytelling, and it's just really interesting because this professor used those points of storytelling and then incorporated them with a lot of pre-existing movies, especially Star Wars and New Hope, and I'm a big Star Wars fan, so it really was just fun to watch him break all these down, and just, the structure just, it just provides a great structure to write to. And it's just really fun to look at because you can, once you know the structure, you can see it in like everything, like almost every movie you ever watch. So I'm hoping this can kind of be like an open presentation. I don't want it to be just me talking to you or at you, but if there's any point where you're like, hey, this is a movie that I think shows this point very well, or like I might ask you, is there a movie that you can think of that has this certain structure? Or this certain story point that really illustrates it well. I have some experience screenwriting. I have never written like a full-length film or anything like this, which is what this is mostly based on. But I just really like talking about it, so I don't claim to be an expert, but I just really thought that this structure was really fun to look at, especially if you're going to be writing. And while it's mostly focused on a full-length script, like 120 minutes, this can apply to any short you might write too. Just kind of shrink it down to a short.
Save the Cat was the book?
Save the Cat is the book. It's by, the last name is Snyder. I can't remember the first name.
S-N-Y or S-N-I?
S-N-Y, I think. So people might ask, like, why do I need to write based on an established story structure? Why can't I just write my own story based on what I feel would be right for this, this story? But it's because if you think about it, if you have a cookbook and you're wanting to make, a certain dish for your group of friends, you're not just going to want to throw the cookbook out before you've even ever made it. You're going to want to use the cookbook for the first couple times you make the dish to make sure you know what you're doing. And then once you really you have the recipe memorized, that's when you can start playing with it, adding your own spices, making it kind of what you want it to be. And that's kind of what this structure I'm about to talk about I think is really good for. It gives a really good point to start with when you're writing a story. And also, we've told stories this way and we've crafted this story structure for all of our history. And we know it works because that's what Hollywood is built on, is this story structure. And you see it around campfire when you have the classic story arc and it has the specific beats in the story that you want to hit to really get people engaged. So we know the stories.
The cavemen had to tell their story, didn't they?
Exactly.
On the cave walls, you go to Leston, you see that.
Yeah, and you know that when you're listening to a story, you know when someone's a good storyteller when they usually hit the established story beats that you expect to hear in a story. So here's what you might have seen in like English class in high school. You have the exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. Most people, know the story structure. We're going to basically be breaking this down into even more specific beats, but it will have the same overarching look. So it's going to look like this. We're going to go through all these. There's 15 story beats in total. So we're going to start with, let me kind of break this down a little bit more. So we have this section, and it's broken up by page numbers because usually in a screenplay you have around 110 to 120 pages. Each page is about a minute of screen time. You can count on each page being a minute of screen time. So if you have 120 pages in your script, it's going to be 120 minutes movie. And so these beats are going to be broken down to page numbers and percentages through the story. So usually, if you see like the midpoint here, that's usually smack dab in the middle of your screenplay because, it's It's at the 50% mark. So I'll start with the very beginning, with the opening image. So the opening image, of course, happens on page 1. And the opening image that you want to write into your story gives context, and it establishes mood and or genre of the story you're writing. Which one are you?
Just a wonderful crop of things.
These are most of the movies that we're going to be focusing on. This one, not really, but Little Miss Sunshine, I don't know if you guys have seen that movie, but it's a great movie. And this is such an incredible opening shot because, you know, in the reflection of her glasses is like the Miss America pageant, and it's just this little kid wanting to be in a pageant. And so just like but what better way to start and establish, just tell exactly what the story's going to be about right in your first shot. So the first shot can really just, if you think about the differences between all of these genres and movies, and it's all given in just, you know, the first image on the screen. It doesn't have to be exactly the first image, but it's the first thing that is really, you know, sticks in your mind. Like this might not be the first image of The Lion King, but when you think of the beginning of The Lion King, you either think of the sun rising or, you know, this iconic shot. So yeah, here we have Elf, Lion King, Shrek, shows the fairy tale theme genre, and it really establishes, okay, what are we watching here? Your viewers don't want to be confused for the first little bit of meandering through the script. You want to know what you're watching. So there's the opening image. And then from pages 1 to 10, you're going to be working on the setup to the story. It establishes context relevant to the protagonists or the protagonist or protagonists. And you want to try to make it as visual as possible. You know, you can always establish a setup through dialogue and such, but it usually, since you're working with the visual medium, at least with screenwriting, you're going to want to focus on making the setup visual. So an example here is Inside Out. Joy's narration at the very beginning sets up how Riley's personality works and how, you know, her islands of personalities exist, how she has these 5 different main aspects of her personality running her brain, and these are all really important things to know going into this story because you're not going to understand anything after this, basically. Star Wars: A New Hope, Darth Vader attacks the rebel ship because they're searching for hidden plans. That's very important moving forward because that really drives everything from there on, and it introduces a lot of the protagonists. Elf talks about how Buddy became to be a human at the North Pole, and Get Out, as I think is another really well-structured version of this, Save the Cat type structure. Chris is a photographer, and he's going to meet the parents of his white girlfriend. So the setup usually takes from pages 1 to 10, and within that setup, the theme is going, it doesn't have to be stated, and also I should have introduced it by saying this, like, it might say, like, you have to do this by page blah, 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 or page blah, blah, blah. It's not like, you don't have to do every single thing it says, but to keep it in mind is a good idea, just to kind of push you forward.
Gives you pacing.
Yeah, it gives you pacing. Absolutely. And so the third beat that Snyder has is the theme being stated. And this is the hardest one to find examples for because it's just, there are so many themes stated at some point. Some point it could be very subtle. Some point it could be shown in a visual way. Some point it might have been shown in a dialogue way. So it could be very direct or indirect. Some examples here, Inside Out, Joy says there's always a way to turn things around when they're moving to San Francisco. Just kind of showing that the theme is there a way to turn things around from a standpoint of personality. Lion King, everything life touches will be yours when you are king. Elf, we all just have different talents. You're special. Dark Knight, know your limits, or you either become a hero or live yourself long enough. Live to see yourself long enough.
Live long.
Live to see yourself become a villain. And this is usually stated around page 5. But again, you could have this theme stated in the first page. You could have the theme stated in, you know, halfway through. But this is just a very general suggestion. Then, this is one of the most important moments in your entire script is the catalyst. And this happens right in the middle of Act 1. Couldn't you, because we don't have the Wi-Fi information. Here, give me just a second. I'm going to sign in the Wi-Fi. Star Wars: A New Hope. It's the point where Luke has met Ben Kenobi, and they're back at Ben Kenobi's little hut, and R2-D2 plays the message from Princess Leia on, the hologram, and it says, "Help me what we want, Kenobi, you're my only hope." And they listen to the full message for the first time, and it gives the entire context of why Ben Kenobi is needed. And in that moment, Ben Kenobi says, "Luke, you must come with me on this quest. This is something that you must be a part of." And he directly addresses him and says, "You will come with me and you will learn the ways of the Force like your father." So the catalyst is something that breaks the norm. Luke was a farmer boy, and now he's being presented a challenge that brings him into this world that he's never been a part of, but could make a big difference. So this is a great example of a catalyst. This should have it around page 12. So when you're writing for your characters, make sure there's always this something that changes the norm, something that is it's got to be something that raises everything from what had previously been happening in the setup. Here's some examples of the catalysts. From Elf, there's the moment where Buddy finds out that he's a human. That's a big deal. That breaks the norm for him as an elf. That's what he believes is an elf. In Shrek, it's when all the fairy tale creatures show up in his swamp. And, his norm is living in the swamp by himself. And this is breaking the norm and confronts him with, having to do something about it. Inside Out, what's her name? Riley breaks down in front of the class, and all of the emotions have kind of lost their control, and it just really hammers home how sad she is to be in this new place of San Francisco. Also, you guys can argue with me if you don't think this is the catalyst. It can be kind of subjective, of the movie. You can say, I think it's, it might be more fitted to be the other point of this movie. So you can argue with me if you want to. But Lion King here, this is pretty clear cut one. It's when Mufasa dies. That's a pretty big catalyst.
I think it's interesting also because of the four of these, The Lion King, I just based off of having watched it, I think that's a pretty late catalyst.
Yes.
It happens much later in the movie, and I think part of that has to do with, sort of developing the relationship between Mufasa and Simba so that his loss is more sort of emotionally moving to the audience. But I do think it's interesting because I can't think of any other event that really has that same sort of call to action as it does.
I completely agree. And when I was looking at this, I was even thinking, that's probably the midpoint. But because it is so late on, but no, it really makes sense.
Narratively, it's the catalyst.
It's definitely the catalyst.
Runtime wise, it's the
Yeah, exactly. Because it really pushes him to move away. It changes the norm, and doesn't move away. He runs away.
I don't remember Lion King. I don't remember that specific scene. Like, what happens in the Lion King between the beginning and there?
Yes.
So there's an elephant grave. The elephant graveyard is this thing that's sort of put in between, like that establishing beginning, and he's like out on his walk with Zazu or whatever.
Oh, this is with the hyenas.
Yeah. And so this is this stampede or whatever. But yeah, he goes on with Nala and like tries to ditch Zazu by means of musical number. And
they stumble in there.
And they stumble in there. And then there's like the, I'm only brave when I have to be, kings don't show braveness by just looking for trouble.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Exactly. And I think, sorry, just switching this. What was I going to say? But yeah, I think that part of the story is still very important. You can't skip that because that's important character development that comes back later. When Nala comes back and finds Simba. But I think even though like that climax or the catalyst is later on, all that stuff before that was still very important because it becomes very
You can't skip that. It's just, I think,
build up to it.
Because otherwise, if you just skip through it, when Nala comes back later, or he sees Mufasa like return to him as a ghost, it's like, okay, we don't care about these characters.
That's way more important.
Yeah. The debate or the denial of the call usually happens right after the catalyst, because and since the catalyst should be such a massive break from the norm, it presents such a formidable challenge against the protagonist. it should be big enough that the protagonist, their initial instinct is to hesitate and say, no, I don't want to do this. Like, I can't do this. I'm just a farmer boy. I'm just Luke Skywalker. I'm just here by myself. Like, I have chores to do. Like, that's the clip I was going to show. Is just continue.
I just wanted to go to Tashi Station.
I just wanted to go to Tashi Station and pick up some power converters. But his like exact line after, it's like the line exactly following, you will join me to, learn the ways of the Force like your father. Luke's like, I can't do that. I'm a farm boy. And so usually this can last a decent amount, or a decent amount of time, or it can be pretty quick. It really kind of varies depending on, your character, because your character could be very up for the challenge. Or very hesitant. And then in Elf, you have this moment, or like, the part of Elf when he, like, after he hears, like, you're a human, he gets all woozy, and he's, like, going through all these flashbacks of, being a human in an elf world and not realizing it at the time. And then he's running away and, like, not now, Arctic Puffin. It's just, I think Elf is just really well structured in this way. So this is very important to have that hesitation. And then there's the break in Act 2, which is the moment when the protagonist says, okay, I will accept my challenge, and moves forward with pursuing whatever the challenge is. And then, what was this clip? This clip was going to be from Lord of the Rings, actually, from Fellowship of the Ring. There's a scene, it's the scene where Frodo accepts, like, I will go to Mordor, I will bring the ring, I will destroy it. It's just, I picked it because it's a very clear-cut, example of...
Is that when they're in Rivendell?
It's when they're in Rivendell, and I picked, in Lord of the Rings...
Boromir's got that meme picture.
Exactly, it's like one does not simply go into
walk
into Mordor. And Lord of the Rings is interesting because it's their structures aren't separated by movie. It's basically the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Everything is just, it's one massive arc. So even though this happens at the end of the first movie, or no, I guess it's the middle, gosh, they're so long. But when Frodo accepts the challenge to bring the ring, it's just a very good example of the breaking into Act 2, accepting the call, moving forward. And they must choose to accept this challenge to move forward. It can't just be thrown onto them and they just like, nope, I'll do it, and they just have no control in the matter, because then, we're not as invested if they didn't choose to pursue this. And this is a very small moment in A New Hope, but it's very clear cut still. It's after Luke sees that his aunt and uncle have been killed by stormtroopers. He comes back to Obi-Wan and says, I want to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like my father. It's very clearly stated. All right, that's where we're moving forward. And then the acceptance of the call for Elf is when he decides to go to New York and find his father. A lot of father stuff. And it's usually around this time where the B story begins. B stories are interesting. I've never written a B story because when it comes to a short story, you don't need a B story. When you're writing a short screenplay, there's no room for a B story. You're just sticking with the main plot. But the B story is often, a secondary story that cuts, that is cut to between the A story. So some examples here are in Elf, the A story is Buddy trying to win his father's love and becoming accustomed to human life in New York. B story is Buddy and Jovi's love story. Often B stories in at least movies like Elf are the romantic stories, the love interest. Empire Strikes Back, the A story, Luke is receiving training from Yoda, facing his demons. B story, Han, Leia, and Chewie are in Cloud City. Silence of the Lambs, another great movie. A story, Clarice is trying to get information from Hannibal Lecter. B story, Buffalo Bill is, murdering people and trying to evade the FBI. I don't know if anyone has any examples, other examples of B stories they have on their mind from movies they watched recently.
I don't know that, but I do have I do think it's interesting how much or how little, or maybe not how much or how little, but for how long the A and B stories are separate, because Empire Strikes Back, when you look at it, they're separated like almost the whole time during the movie. And I hadn't noticed it until the last time I watched it. they really aren't together that much, and you're still invested because there was a movie before that to sort of establish the relationships between Luke and the rest of the crew.
Right.
But like, you know, that B story is pretty separate to like the last quarter of the movie.
Yeah.
But Silence of the Lambs, it's like by the first third after they start sort of talking to, after Clary starts talking to Hannibal Lecter, that starts to weave in a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. It's something I learned in making this is that in a lot of movies, the B story will intersect and affect the A story when, we'll talk about this later, but when Act 2 ends and Act 3 begins. That's usually when they intersect and they kind of influence each other. And the B story can often inspire the protagonist in the A story to, you know, make the final push through the final act, which I thought was interesting. Again, it doesn't have to happen, but is interesting. And then the fun and games portion. This is just a very general time, you know, between usually pages 30 and 55. It's the beginning of Act 2. Usually it takes up the entirety of the first half of Act 2. So you have Act 1 with the setup and everyone, and then when the actual adventure begins, that's Act 2. And then Act 2 is usually split in half. First half being fun and games. It's very kind of general, at least in this description, but it's just establishing and exploring character. And, okay, so yeah, this is where the character should really be explored in this time. So here are some examples of fun and games. In section here, you have, you know, the part where they're really exploring the dream world, and Cobb is teaching Ariadne how to, you know, really control the dream world, and you get some really fun visuals there, fun and games. Fun and games does not have to be fun. Like with Get Out, you have the garden party, which is not fun and games, but it's definitely it's an arena, you know, where the character can be explored and the theme is really dug into, and the character is very confused, but it's very much driving the story forward in a very, you know, kind of chilling way. And then a very clear-cut sense of fun games in The Lion King is when Simba is with Timon and Pumbaa. Here's some of the other examples. Luke meets Han and Chewie. They end up on the Death Star in A New Hope. Shrek, they travel to and save Fiona. That one's a little, I'm not so sure about that one. You can argue with that with me, but I kind of figured that would be the fun and games for Shrek. Then Inside Out, Go in Sadness, try to get back to the control center, meeting Bing Bong along the way. Bing Bong is a lot of fun, a lot of games. Then Get Out. Then the midpoint is another very important aspect of the script. It's not, I don't think it's as important as the catalyst, but it's still a very important moment. It's where a shift occurs, the stakes are raised in some way. You can see it as another inciting incident or catalyst, yeah. It's kind of like another separate catalyst. It kind of defines how the rest of the movie will go from that point. A plan is usually made to move forward between characters. Like I'm thinking like A New Hope, and the decision is made to save Leia on the Death Star. That's not really a big momentous moment, but it is very clear-cut when they say, let's save the princess, and it decides where they're going to be going for the rest of the movie. And Titanic, that's a very clear-cut midpoint where the stakes are raised and determines the rest of the movie. Is where they hit the iceberg. The Jurassic Park T-Rex scene, yeah. That's right. That's okay. No, you're good. You're good. I'll take it. I'll move very slowly. And then, yes, the T-Rex scene is a very big moment in Jurassic Park. Back to the Future, Marty and Doc make the plan to get Marty back to the future by, you know, attaching the hook on top of the DeLorean and timing it up with the lightning. Any other thoughts on what a midpoint can be? Those are a little they're kind of difficult to pinpoint. So if you can't think of any, that's okay.
Does the midpoint always have to be in the middle structurally, or does it?
Usually is.
Okay.
Usually is pretty close to the midpoint, or to the literal halfway point of the movie.
It's like right right now when the theaters are opening back up and people are really going back. And it's gonna be interesting to see, right now, I can't remember the name of the movie, it's a thriller that's, taking the box office. And Cruella is number 3, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I heard that one. I heard someone say it was good. I'm interested to see that because I'm a big Emma Stone fan, but I wasn't super excited to see Cruella, the trailers. But that's another conversation.
Yeah.
Were you talking about A Quiet Place too?
But something that I learned from one of our mutual friends who's an English major, she was just like, don't say, it's the same thing in a novel. Her anxiety level rises, doesn't do anything. Like, how does the character show that? Do they clench their fists? Are they wringing their hands? Are they, like, starting to, like twirl up their hair? Because otherwise, it's such a general thing. And if you can't sort of see it in your mind, or you won't be able to see it on your screen, I think it
So
applies all
you
of it.
can't just say, that anger is causing this type of reaction.
No, and it's different for everybody. Like I know, like in my theater actor background, sometimes, a lot of the time, a director I worked with, one of our professors, Dinah Robbins, anytime that there was a stage direction regarding a certain way to play the character's like emotional portrayal, well, that works great in a film, lots of times, different productions, because it's all the same script, just done over and over again. It's not like a movie where this is the definitive version of it until they remake it, and even if they do that, they're not just gonna take the script and copy paste it. But there's some flexibility is key because again, it helps your production team sort of help add stuff to the vision they might not have come up with.
Then you
before.
redefine something too.
Mhm.
I would say the only exception to this, like if you're doing what I do and you produce your own films that you write,
Yeah.
you probably got a little more freedom.
Oh,
leeway
sure.
To write how you want, but if you're writing it for someone else, the film, like Hollywood, you gotta be very careful.
No, like Ben said earlier, there's no blueprint to how to do any one thing. Obviously, like if you have a certain style of writing, and it's really helpful to have an actor clued in with certain stuff. There's a certain way that it seems, this is pretty clear that this is how the character feels about it. It can portray that, and that's great, But again, that's the disconnect between theater and film, though, I think, because you write the script for it to be shot, and it's its own entity. But when you write a play,
Yeah.
a bunch of people are going to do it. Hopefully, like that's their hope. There are different productions of it, and so then the elasticity has to be a bit more abstract, I guess.
Because as each person takes on that character,
They're going to go about it differently
Right.
a little bit.
Right. within the structure, but still just a little bit.
Yeah, like some person can read one line one way, and someone else can read it totally different.
And then when it comes to, what was I gonna say? Camera movements and detailed direction, but like with the exception that Marty was saying, if you're planning on directing it, you can be a little fluid with this, but if you're writing it for someone else, leave camera movements and detailed direction to the director. Don't write that stuff in. Usually when someone reads, I think if you're gonna wanna sell your script and you give it to someone professionally to like read your script and they start seeing that you've written in camera directions and everything, they're gonna be like, amateur. So it's good to keep that stuff out. Keep in mind you're writing a blueprint of a novel. Usually when it comes to screenwriting, keep it succinct and very visually descriptive.
And should you have someone with more knowledge and background, look at what you've written
Yeah,
and say, hey, maybe you wanna look at this or
yeah,
that, or,
yeah, because feedback is super important because when you get too close to a project or something, similar to a screenplay or a play or whatever you're writing, you get too close to it and you don't really notice flaws that are, pretty massive and could be, kind of detrimental to your project. You really need other people to look at it.
because they can't read your mind.
Exactly. They can't read your mind. But yeah, they might be like, I don't get this. And you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. It's right there.
It's real clear to me, huh?
Yeah. Almost done here. Dialogue. Make it realistic. This really is kind of flexible. It's up to you or your style as a writer. You can make it realistic, but also make sure it remains entertaining, because you don't want to just be writing a conversation that is not intriguing at all. It can be super realistic, but it could be very boring. But the balance does depend on your writing, because, as I mentioned, Aaron Sorkin earlier, he really likes to write dialogue like you would never hear in real life, because why else do you watch movies or TV shows than to hear dialogue that you would never hear in real life? It's incredibly fast-paced, incredibly, witty, and, they're coming up with jokes on the top of a hat. It's like, oh, that's entertaining. Boom, huh, that made me laugh.
That's
Great.
like the Gilmore Girls.
Yeah,
Like
they
a
do.
lot of them.
Yeah.
Snappy pattern.
I think the golden rule for dialogue is less is more.
Right.
Because it's the cinematography that really drives the story, not the words that are spoken.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Imagery.
And I don't know if you guys know Noah Baumbach. He directed Marriage Story recently, but he's also directed some other things. His dialogue is incredibly realistic, and I really like his stuff, because his stories are still very interesting, but it's like you're watching, you're like a fly on the wall watching the dialogue, and it all seems improvised, but every little word down to each pause, each everything is meticulously written, and I think that's really interesting, and it takes a lot of skill to write like that, but it just shows that you can be incredibly different styles of dialogue writing, and I think that's really fun. I enjoy both Sorkin and Baumbach, but some people hate Sorkin because it's gosh, the dialogue is way too, unrealistic.
Too much. Yeah.
Too much. Ron Howard, who's a director, said that screenwriting dialogue scenes usually appear like a conversation that would take 3 to 4 encounters to get to in real life. So that's kind of what I was talking about with Sorkin, where when you're watching a movie, you want to see something that you would not see in real life, because you don't want to be bored. You want to see something that would usually take 3 to 4 times to get to in real life. If you could redo a conversation 3 or 4 times, then it would get super polished, super fun, super witty, everything like that. And it's also good when you're writing to read your dialogue out loud, because it's going to be performed out loud. If you write a novel, that might be different. But if you're writing a screenplay, people are going to be saying your words. If you write a play, someone's going to be reading your words out loud. So make sure you are reading your words out loud so you don't get tongue-tangled and you have it ready for the actors. And also with dialogue, people rarely ever say what they're feeling directly. No one ever stands up in front of a group and says, I'm nervous. But if they say, you can tell by the way that they might be saying something that they are nervous, or just subtext goes a long way in dialogue. That's the difference between good dialogue and bad dialogue. You're not going to say, I am sad, or I love you. I mean, you might say, I love you, but you can also say, I hate you, but by the subtext and the situation that it said, you can tell that they're trying to say, I love you, or they say some kind of comment about someone's shoes, but the way you can say, tell the conversation has been going, or the situation they're in, they're trying to say, I love you, but they say it through, those are my shoes. Does that kind of make sense? Subtext is important to, separate bad writing from good writing. Some random character notes I have here. Character weaknesses are often their strengths pushed too far. Self-confidence leads to cockiness. Curiosity leads to obsession. Caring leads to being overbearing. And what's the quote from Star Wars? And that leads to the dark side.
Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate.
Hate leads to dark.
Suffering, I think.
A character has to stand for something, even if it's stupid. If it's really stupid, you can have other characters point out that it's stupid, but you have to have them stand for something. Have a character make a decision to show who they are at their core. Do they help the old lady across the street, or do they not? Keep asking yourself, is the main character's conflict unavoidable, or can they just walk away? If they can walk away, that conflict is not engaging enough. They have to be stuck in it. The audience will not buy it if it's not. Some good exercises you can do by yourself is to read a script and then watch the movie. There are a couple of websites it's IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, but the S for script, Internet Movie Script Database. Bunch of scripts for free you can read through. Script Slug as well. A lot of great popular recent movies on there. Aaron Sorkin recommends reading Aristotle's Poetics. It's a very short pamphlet. It can be found, you can read it for free online, and it just basically goes over all of the important aspects of writing and stories. It's very interesting. I think it's important as a storyteller to know that bit. Rewrite some pages of a pre-existing script word for word. You can maybe just do that for a scene or for however long you want if you want to absorb a desired writing style. If I want to write dialogue like Aaron Sorkin, I might look at one of his scripts and just type out exactly what he has just to get a sense of how it might go. I don't know if that's worked, I've never done it, but it's an exercise you can do. And then dialogue, you can listen to a real life conversation and write it all down to get a sense of how conversations actually go and how they look on paper. So that's the end of what I have. We can take a quick break if anyone needs to use the restroom, but then I was thinking we could come back. I know, Marty, you want to talk about some points. Actually, maybe if you want to talk about those points now, then we can take a break. And then move on to just kind of talking about some ideas you guys might have and maybe try to develop them.
Okay, yeah, I find when I write, one thing I really like to do is, whenever I get writer's block or stuck, I like to ask myself questions about my characters and like actually speak out loud and ask yourself these questions like, okay, does this make sense? Why is my character doing this? And just actually say these things out loud. It really helps a lot.
Just the oration of it.
Exactly, just
It bounces.
talking to yourself, it really helps a lot. And I also love to listen to music, you know, my favorite kinds of music while I'm writing. Like I'll put something on YouTube and listen to it while I'm writing. That'll really get your juices flowing and it gives you motivation for your story. You ever read any screenwriting books, like Sid Field?
Yeah, I have that. I was looking at that last week, actually.
Yeah, in Sid Field's book, I forget the title of it.
It's like butterflies and something. I'm trying to
I don't
remember.
think it's that one,
Or
but
no.
it's
Is it a screenplay?
Yeah,
Or
it's-
how to write one?
It's one of his books on screenplays. He says in that book something I don't agree with, saying, don't share your work.
Oh goodness, sorry. I was trying to look up the book.
It's all right, yeah, he says to only share your work with three or four people, no more than that. I don't agree with that. I say share your work with as many people as you like. And just take real good notes on everybody's idea and then just make the best informed decision on it.
Oh, it's a screenplay. The one that I had, a screenplay, The Foundations of Screenwriting.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah.
And what's the gentleman's name again?
Sid Field, S-Y-D,
Oh,
Field.
S-Y-D.
Mhm.
Field.
Yeah, I think I have that one too.
Like Sidney.
And he also talks about doing outlines and doing note cards, and you have to do it this way, you have to do it that way. I think it's best just to find your own way of outlining, but it definitely helps.
And it definitely, I think it's a very much a case-to-case basis. On the one hand, I would love to show my work to as many people as possible.
Right.
On the other hand,
No.
I'm way too easily influenced by other people's opinions. I think one of the damning things I did to myself when I was starting to write this other like sort of novelization of a book that I wanted to write since I was like a kid was that I shared it with like 8 or 9 people right away, and I was only like 20 pages into it. And
Yeah.
at least some of the more experienced writers had some, albeit extremely, like, entirely right and like sage advice about style and structure. But, and maybe it was because I shared it to them too early when I didn't have enough substance to work off of. But I think I was just so overwhelmed by the differences of opinion. Because like one person was like, I think you can cut this whole section out. Because it's really just sort of tiptoeing around the things you need to say. And then this other person was like, no, I think that character moment is really important to keep because it informs us of who they are and makes the changes they go through later more dramatic as a narrative structure. And so like, yeah, it's different for everyone. But if I had the will to be able to show it to like 15 people and still see sight of my actual vision, that'd be great. Maybe it's because I was going in being like, I'm in over my head. I don't know how I'm doing this. I thought that would solve it. But it works. Not worse. It's just like right now I'm writing a short story. I shared it with like one person, and that's it. And they haven't even written or read all of it. They like bookmarked it after the first 5, and they were like, "I like what you have so far." And I was like, "That's fine. I'll just keep going." And then after I get at least the first draft done, I'll be like, hey, what do you think?
And one thing that's absolutely unavoidable is rewriting.
Oh, yeah.
That's just the name of the game. Writing is rewriting. I mean, I've been working on this cinematic universe now for 7 years, and I'm just, you're supposed to arc out your stories and your characters, but I haven't even really been able to do that for short films because I'm always writing something and filming it and then rewriting it and refilming it. It's just over and over again. It's tough because it's tough to follow all these rules. It's easy if you're writing a 123-page script, which I have written one script that is 123 pages. It's much easier to follow these rules for long scripts as opposed to short scripts.
Do you also think, you talked about 7 years here.
Yeah.
Do you also think as your experiences in life change as you go along,
Yes.
that you incorporate that or you see things a different way perhaps?
Oh, absolutely. It's the writer's journey is
Right.
what it is.
Right. That's what
And it's like, I want to follow all these rules, but it's so tough to do it for short films.
Yeah,
Right.
it's
It's really hard to do it for
really
short films.
hard, yeah.
I think another thing, piggybacking off the rewriting, is that, at least I always run into this, it's like sort of a two-faceted issue, where the editor brain is turned on at the same time as the writer brain. So I will stare at my computer and I will be like, yeah, I wrote for 2 hours, and I'll get like maybe a page done, and I was exhausted. I don't know how.
That's another piece.
Well, time flies when you're writing, oh my God.
And another thing is like, maybe you are on a roll. You're just like, it's coming to you, the juices are flowing, and it's just really organically happening. And then maybe a couple days later, you're getting to a point you go, oh, maybe I should go back and change this. And you go, do I do that now? Or does that start a rabbit hole of me constantly tweaking and like revising things before it's done?
I read, or I think it was from another master class, but I think it was Judd Apatow that said, you have your creative side of your brain that's going to vomit crazy stuff on the page, and then you're going to have your critiquing side that's going to really break it down. Have those operating on different days. Like have some days where you really just throw up and you vomit, and then you're going to have like the critiquing guy, like side of the brain the other day. So
Feel like, hold on, guys.
Yeah.
And I
It's
think
too low.
I haven't yet figured out.
What I found the most challenging part of screenwriting is when I go back and change things, continuity. That's very important to avoid plot holes. When you go back and change something, you got to meticulously reread that script to make sure continuity, that you don't create plot holes, and just follow up with everything else that might have changed in that story.
Right, because as I'm writing like a fantasy short story, that sycophantic nerd that's like, why didn't they use the eagles the whole time? He's always there. And I'm like, what if I just want to make a character-driven decision? Maybe it's not the logical one.
Yeah.
But that's always creeping where it's like, do I come up with a reason that logically they couldn't do it and it's bolstered by a character-driven decision?
Yep.
Just to cover the bases? It's the whole idea of if the character can walk away, then they're not going to buy it, like it says there. Well, maybe they can, but they don't want to.
Yeah.
But why would they want to stay if these are the things that are happening? And
Yeah.
so it's very difficult to sort of.
It's hard.
When I teach intro to film, and continuity is always a big thing.
Yes.
So when let's say I show a film as an example, and I got my little list here. Okay, let's look at this. Is that continuity? Is this flowing? What's in here that maybe looks like maybe it doesn't belong in there? All those kinds of things, and stuff they never thought about before. Certain time periods and what was going on then. That didn't belong in there. That didn't happen then.
Anachronisms, yeah, that can happen a lot in period pieces.
Yeah.
Stuff they never thought of before.
Yeah. The continuity is so hard. Yeah. Just
It
like
is.
making logical decisions, like in a script,